what do you do for that final essay before they, not final essay, I'm sorry, the final
text
reading passage that is on the prompt before they write, so that you're sure that they're able to think about it and analyze these figurative language and these quotes in an independent and critical thinking manner?
Okay. Everything That Rises Must Converge is the third text that they're directed to read in the prompt. It's by Flannery O'Connor, who's also a Georgia author. And what we did in class is, again, we utilized the document camera, and students all had a copy of the text to which they could follow along. And I put one highlighted copy underneath the document camera, minus these labels that you see down the side. So the only thing students would have seen is some highlighted sections.
So they just have a text with highlights.
A text with highlights. Okay, so I haven't pulled back completely. There's still a little bit of hand-holding there. And as a class, they are required to come up with the label. And just like with everyday use, it's not map-worthy, because, again, they're doing another tree map for Everything That Rises Must Converge.
They're practicing the skill of taking notes on a separate sheet of paper of these.
But now I'm not showing it to them on the wall in my room.
They're doing it on their own.
They're doing it completely on their own. So in order for something to go onto their map, sitting independently at their desk, it has to be labeled. So my co-teacher and I, if it's my co-taught class, or myself on my own in my independently taught class, would call who can identify this first highlighted piece of figurative language.
What if the same student raises their hand over and over again?
Well, and that does happen. I have a couple of students who just, they like to share. And what I do is I time them out. Okay, you can't raise your hand anymore. They hate that. But it forces them to work on a skill that's just as important. They need to learn to listen to what their peers say.
And have self-control.
And have self-control, yes. They need to learn to what their peers say, because maybe what somebody else says will give them a new idea. Or maybe somebody else's analysis will be better. Because they're not just identifying the highlighted figurative language now on their own. Now, when they raise their hand or when I cold call on them, they have to identify the figurative language and interpret and analyze its usage before I'm going to say, okay, good job. They have to say why they think the writer used that particular simile, or why they think, or how the usage of imagery in a specific passage affected the text itself.
Now, so cold calling is essentially where you call on any student randomly, and they have no idea if you're going to call on them.
They don't.
So if I'm a student and I want to, maybe get participation credit or a grade for participating that day, or if I just don't want to look silly and ignorant.
You have to be on top of your game.
I have to be on top of my game. So they've had time to do the work, knowing that they're going to be accountable to you and the class at any moment.
Absolutely. And it is very much a collaborative accountability. They're not just accountable to me. They're accountable to their peers. Because maybe, for example, if you were a student, Daniel, maybe you knew that, one particular part was irony, but you're not sure why the writer used it. And I call on your friend, and he knows why he used it. Then you can write that down on your tree map too. So it is very much a collaborative effort when we approach this last text. And Flannery O'Connor is very much a master of figurative language. She used a lot of figurative language that double dips and that can be classified as two things, which allows students to kind of expand even further on their knowledge and through that discussion. So we didn't even do the whole text for Flannery O'Connor. We didn't need to.
Because you were doing a close reading.
Yes.
Which meant that you were sort of zeroing in on a specific part and really trying to see what is in there and what are the different interpretations of one chunk of text.
Exactly. And the chunks of text were teacher selected. I chose them because I want to, again, have my students meet that challenge that I've set for them, and that is to understand why specific figurative language enhances the meaning of the text.
It sounds like you have to do that even with 2 hours. You can't sit for 2 hours in an 8th grade class doing the entire text.
No. So we read and do the nuts and bolts literary discussion of the text one day, and when we visit the text the next day is when we come back and we do the annotation and the tree map note-taking, with the exception of the poem. Now, the poem, we did all of that in one day, just because it was a different process. But with the 2 short stories, they're longer works of literature. There's a lot more depth there. Well, I don't know that I should say more depth, but there's a lot more figurative language for possibilities of discussion. So we broke that up over 2 days.
Okay. So I guess now that they've read these three stories, or poems and stories,
Yes.
now they're going to synthesize what they've learned using their notes and their annotations
Yes.
and their analysis into an essay.
Exactly.
So we'll see how that got started
Yes.
next.